Daniel's cabin had always been a place of peace for him, a quiet corner of the mountains where he could leave behind the noise of the city. His grandfather had built it decades ago with his own hands, cutting timber from the forest and carrying stones from the nearby river. For Daniel, it wasn't just a cabin. It was a piece of family history full of memories from childhood summers spent fishing, hiking, and sitting by the fire. Over the years, the small wooden structure had been repaired and modernized here and there, but it still carried the charm of something passed down through generations. Daniel didn't live there permanently. He worked in the city, several hours away, and usually came to the cabin only on weekends or during vacations. Still, he took pride in keeping it clean and well kept. Every spring, he would spend a few days fixing the porch steps, repainting the shutters, and checking the roof for leaks. He made sure to pay the community's homeowner fees on time, even though he didn't always agree with the way the Homeowners Association, or HOA, handled things. For him, it was worth it just to maintain the cabin and have a peaceful retreat. The community itself was a mixture of permanent residents and vacation homeowners. Nestled among pine trees, it had winding gravel roads, a small lake, and walking paths that families enjoyed during summer months. It was the kind of place where people waved to one another as they passed. Though not everyone got along perfectly, some neighbors were friendly, always ready to help, while others liked to keep to themselves. And then there were people like Karen. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for several years and was deeply involved with the HOA. In fact, she was one of its most active members, often reminding others of rules about lawn care, parking, or how trash bins should be placed. While some saw her as a committed community leader, others found her overbearing. Daniel had crossed paths with her before, brief interactions where she pointed out minor violations, such as leaving his truck parked too close to the road or not trimming his hedges as frequently as she thought necessary. Daniel usually nodded politely and moved on, not wanting to start arguments. Life had been busy for Daniel in recent months. His work required him to travel often, and because of that, he hadn't visited the cabin for nearly half a year. He had planned to return for the upcoming holidays, but unexpectedly, his work schedule shifted, and he found himself with a free week in early autumn. Instead of waiting, he decided to head back to the mountains sooner. The thought of crisp air, colorful fall leaves, and evenings by the fireplace filled him with excitement. The drive itself was calming. As the city traffic faded into open highways, Daniel rolled down his windows to let the cool air in. The landscape slowly changed from wide fields to rolling hills, and eventually the tall evergreens of the mountain community came into view. With each mile, his anticipation grew. He pictured the cabin exactly as he had left it. The wooden rocking chair on the porch, the old lamp in the corner of the living room, the stack of books by the fireplace. He looked forward to sipping hot coffee while watching the mist rise over the trees in the morning. When Daniel finally turned onto the familiar gravel road leading into the gated community, he felt a sense of relief, as if he were returning home after a long absence. At the gate, the security guard waved him through without hesitation. After all, he had been a property owner for years. But not everyone welcomed his early arrival with the same warmth. As he drove toward his cabin, he noticed a figure standing near the entrance of the road that led to his property. It was Karen. She was talking to another neighbor, and the moment she spotted Daniel's truck, her expression shifted. She raised her eyebrows, crossed her arms, and watched him intently as he slowed down to wave politely. Instead of waving back, she gave him a questioning look, as though his presence was somehow unexpected or unwelcome. Daniel parked in front of his cabin and began unloading his bags. The air was cool, and the golden light of late afternoon made the cabin look especially inviting. He set down a box of groceries on the porch and went back to the truck for his suitcase. That's when he heard footsteps approaching. Karen was already making her way down the gravel path toward him. "You're back early," she remarked, her tone more suspicious than friendly. "I thought you weren't planning to return until the holidays." Daniel offered a polite smile. "Plans changed. I had some time off, so I figured I'd enjoy the cabin a little sooner." Karen tilted her head, still studying him. "Well, I hope you informed the HOA. We keep track of who comes and goes for the safety of the community." Daniel blinked in surprise. He had never heard of such a rule, and he knew there was nothing in the HOA guidelines requiring homeowners to report their travel schedules. "I wasn't aware I needed to," he said carefully, not wanting to sound confrontational. It's my cabin, so I just decided to come up. Karen pursed her lips but said nothing more for the moment. She gave one last look at his truck, the groceries, and his suitcase before walking away with a brisk step. Daniel shook his head slightly, deciding not to let the interaction bother him. He had come for peace and relaxation, not arguments. Still, as he turned back to the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was unusual. Normally, the cabin looked exactly as he had left it, but today something seemed off. The curtains in the front window were pulled in a way he didn't remember, and there was a faint smell in the air. Wood smoke, perhaps, or cooking, that didn't quite belong. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself it was probably his imagination. He unlocked the front door, expecting the familiar creak of the hinges and the quiet comfort of his family home. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. The door, though locked, opened more easily than he expected, and as soon as he stepped inside, he noticed details that didn't match his memory. A pair of shoes rested by the door, but they weren't his. A jacket hung on the coat rack. Again, not his. On the coffee table, a mug sat half full of tea, still warm as if someone had been there moments ago. Daniel froze, his heartbeat quickening. His cabin, the place he had been looking forward to returning to for months, looked as though someone else had been living there. He set his suitcase down quietly, his mind racing with questions. How could this be? Who had been inside, and why would Karen seem so curious about his early return? Daniel stood in the middle of his cabin, staring at the unfamiliar mug on the table and the shoes by the door. The place that was supposed to feel like home suddenly felt strange, almost like stepping into a stranger's living room. His mind kept searching for explanations. Maybe a neighbor had come in to check on the cabin. Perhaps the HOA had sent someone inside for maintenance or safety. He wanted to believe there was a simple reason, but deep down something didn't feel right. He moved further inside, slowly, as though not wanting to disturb the silence. Every corner of the room carried small hints of someone else's presence. A throw blanket he had folded neatly on the couch months ago was now tossed casually across the armrest. A stack of magazines, none of which belonged to him, sat on the coffee table. In the kitchen, he noticed a grocery bag filled with fresh items he hadn't bought: bread, milk, fruit, and a carton of eggs. Daniel's stomach tightened. This wasn't just someone checking in on the cabin. Someone was using it. He took a deep breath and walked to the bedroom. His heart beat faster as he turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside, the bed was made, but not with his sheets. A different comforter covered the mattress, and a small pile of folded clothes rested on the dresser. The closet door was slightly ajar, and inside hung shirts and jackets that weren't his. Whoever was staying here wasn't just visiting. They had moved in. Daniel stepped back, trying to process the situation. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was too clear. His cabin had been taken over. He thought about calling the police right away, but a part of him hesitated. What if this was somehow connected to the HOA? What if someone had been given permission without his knowledge? That seemed impossible, but then he remembered Karen's curious expression earlier, and her comment about him coming back too soon. As if on cue, he heard footsteps outside. His pulse raced as he carefully peered through the curtain. Karen was walking down the path again, this time with a phone in her hand. She stopped a few feet away from his porch, speaking into the phone with sharp gestures. Daniel opened the door, determined to find out what was going on. "Karen," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you know someone's been staying in my cabin?" Karen glanced up from her phone, her eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here right now," she said quickly. "I already called the police. You can explain it to them." Daniel's chest tightened. "What do you mean I shouldn't be here?" "This is my property." Karen's tone grew firm. "We've been keeping an eye on things. You weren't supposed to come back until later, and now you're showing up out of nowhere. It looks suspicious." "Suspicious," Daniel repeated, hardly believing what he was hearing. "I own this cabin. I have every right to be here." Karen shook her head. "You can say that, but the police will want proof. In the meantime, you shouldn't be inside until this is sorted out." Her words only added to Daniel's confusion and frustration. It was as if she were trying to make him look like the intruder. He wanted to argue further, but at that moment, a sound from inside the cabin made him turn. Soft footsteps approached, and then a woman he had never seen before stepped into the living room. She looked surprised to find Daniel standing there, but not guilty. more like someone who believed she had every right to be inside. "Is everything all right?" the woman asked, glancing from Daniel to Karen. Daniel's mouth went dry. "Who are you? And why are you in my cabin?" Before the woman could answer, Karen stepped closer. "She's staying here," she said simply, as though that explained everything. Daniel's jaw dropped. "Staying here? This is my home. I never gave anyone permission to stay here." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "Karen said it was fine," she admitted. "She told me you weren't using the place for a while and that it was better if someone lived here to take care of it." Daniel's head spun. He looked at Karen, disbelief written all over his face. "You let her move into my cabin? Without even asking me?" Karen crossed her arms. "It's not a big deal. The property was sitting empty and she needed a place. It was a way to keep the cabin occupied and safe." Daniel felt a rush of anger rising in his chest, but he tried to keep his voice calm. "You had no right to do that. This isn't your property to manage. You can't just decide who lives here." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "The HOA has rules about vacant homes. We can't have empty properties attracting problems. I was acting in the best interest of the community." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "There's no rule that gives you the power to put someone in my house. You crossed a line, Karen." The woman inside looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting her weight and glancing between the two of them. It was clear she hadn't expected this confrontation. Before Daniel could press further, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the trees. Karen's expression shifted to one of quiet satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "They'll be here soon," she said. "Then we'll see who's really allowed to be here." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The situation had turned upside down. He was the rightful owner of the cabin, yet Karen had called the police on him, and now he would have to prove he wasn't the intruder. He thought about the copy of the deed he always kept in his truck's glove compartment. For the first time, he felt relieved that he had been cautious enough to bring it along on his trips. Still, the thought of being questioned by the police for trying to enter his own home was unsettling. He stepped back onto the porch, taking in the sight of his cabin, the place filled with memories of his grandfather, his parents, and his own quiet escapes from the city. It hurt to know that someone else had been living there, rearranging things, using the space as if it were theirs. The woman who had been staying inside finally spoke again, her voice soft. "I didn't know. I thought this was arranged properly. I'm sorry." Daniel gave her a short nod, though his focus remained on Karen. He couldn't understand her reasoning. Was this really about keeping the community safe, or was there something more? The way she had acted, the certainty in her tone, made him wonder if she had been planning this for a while. The sound of sirens grew louder, and soon the flashing lights of a police car came into view along the gravel road. Karen straightened her posture, ready to tell her version of the story. Daniel braced himself, determined not to let her twist the truth. He was about to face a situation that could either restore his control over his own property or complicate things even further. And as the police car came to a stop, Daniel realized that the real challenge was only just beginning. The police car stopped in front of the cabin, its lights flashing across the trees and porch. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because maybe the officers would finally set things right. Dread because Karen stood there with her arms folded, clearly ready to spin the situation against him. He tightened his grip on the railing, reminding himself to stay calm and respectful. Two officers stepped out of the car. One was older, with a calm expression and gray at his temples. The other was younger, alert and watchful, scanning the scene carefully. They approached the porch where Daniel stood, while Karen rushed forward to greet them as if she had been expecting honored guests. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Karen began, pointing dramatically toward Daniel. "This man broke into the cabin. He doesn't live here. He came without notice and I caught him trying to claim it as his own." Daniel's mouth opened in shock. "That's not true," he said quickly, but the officers held up a hand for silence. "Ma'am," the older officer said to Karen, "we'll need to hear from both sides before we make any decisions." He turned his gaze toward Daniel. "Sir, can you tell us who you are and what you're doing here?" Daniel took a slow breath. "My name is Daniel Lewis. This is my cabin. My grandfather built it. I come here when I can and I keep everything up to date. I arrived today after being away for work, only to find someone else living inside. Karen seems to think I don't belong here, but I do." The younger officer glanced at Karen, then at the woman standing just inside the doorway. "And who are you?" he asked the woman gently. The woman stepped forward nervously. "My name is Linda. Karen told me I could stay here while the place was empty. She said the owner wouldn't be back for a long time." I thought it was allowed. The officers exchanged a look. Clearly the story was complicated. The older officer asked Daniel, "Do you have proof of ownership?" Daniel felt his heart rate slow just a little. "Yes, I do. The deed is in my truck. I always keep a copy with me for situations like this." He walked down to his truck, careful not to make any sudden movements, and opened the glove box. Pulling out the document, he returned to the porch and handed it to the officer. The older officer studied the paper closely, then nodded to his partner. "This appears valid." He looked at Daniel again. "Can you provide an ID to confirm your name matches?" "Of course." Daniel handed over his driver's license. The officer checked it, then handed both the deed and ID back. Karen's expression tightened, though she tried to mask it with a polite smile. "Well, anyone could bring papers. How do we know he didn't just prepare this to make it look like he owns the place?" The younger officer frowned slightly. "Ma'am, this document is legally binding and it matches his identification. Unless you can prove otherwise, it shows he's the rightful owner." Karen opened her mouth to argue but seemed to hesitate, her confidence slipping for the first time. Meanwhile, Linda shifted awkwardly, lowering her gaze. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said softly. "I thought I was helping keep the cabin from going empty. I didn't know it wasn't allowed." Daniel looked at her, his anger softening a little. She seemed more like a person caught in the middle than a deliberate trespasser. The real problem, he knew, was Karen. The older officer turned to Linda. "Ma'am, you'll need to collect your belongings and leave immediately. This isn't your property and you didn't have permission from the rightful owner." Linda nodded quickly, hurrying inside to gather her things. Karen, however, wasn't ready to give up. "This is unfair," she insisted. "The HOA has responsibilities. We make sure homes aren't left vacant. It was dangerous to have an empty cabin here. I was only acting in the best interest of everyone." The officer's calm voice grew firmer. "That may be your opinion, ma'am, but you don't have the authority to assign someone else to live here. This is private property. Decisions like that can only be made by the owner." Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Karen, this cabin is part of my family history. My grandfather built it. My parents brought me here as a child. I take care of it, I pay the fees, and I never asked anyone else to live here. You had no right to make that choice for me." Karen's face flushed, but she stood tall, unwilling to admit she was wrong. "I was trying to protect the community," she muttered. "By putting a stranger in my home?" Daniel asked quietly. "That's not protection. That's overstepping." Linda returned with a small suitcase, looking embarrassed. She paused in front of Daniel. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I didn't mean to cause pain. I trusted Karen." Daniel nodded slightly. "I understand. But this place is personal to me. It's not just a cabin, it's home." The officers escorted Linda down the path, making sure she left without issue. Karen remained on the porch, her arms still crossed, though her confidence was clearly shaken. Neighbors began to gather nearby, curious about the flashing lights and raised voices. A few whispered to one another, glancing at Karen with questioning looks. The older officer addressed Daniel one last time. "We've confirmed the property belongs to you. From here, I recommend securing the cabin, perhaps changing locks and adding security measures. That way, something like this won't happen again." Daniel thanked the officers, grateful that they had listened. When the police car drove away with Linda in tow, the night grew quiet again. But the sense of peace Daniel had once associated with his cabin was nowhere to be found. Instead, he felt drained, as though the very walls of the cabin had been unsettled by what had happened. Karen lingered, perhaps hoping to recover her influence. But the watching neighbors made it difficult for her to maintain control. One neighbor, an older man who had lived in the community for decades, finally stepped forward. "Karen," he said gently, "you went too far this time." Others murmured in agreement. Karen turned sharply, her voice defensive. "I was protecting us all." But the crowd didn't seem convinced. People began to drift away, shaking their heads. Karen eventually left too, her steps quick and her face stiff with frustration. Daniel stood on his porch long after everyone was gone. He looked at the cabin, at the windows and the porch swing, and tried to imagine how he could feel at home here again after such a violation. He knew he would repair it, physically and emotionally, but the trust he had once placed in the community, and especially in Karen, had been broken. As the night settled over the mountains, Daniel lit a small fire in the fireplace. The familiar crackling sound filled the room, and for a moment he closed his eyes, trying to remember the warmth of old days here. But even in that moment of comfort, he couldn't forget what had just happened. The incident with the police was over, but the story of the cabin, and the challenges of standing up for what was his, was far from finished. The following morning, Daniel woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the cabin windows. The air smelled of pine and earth, familiar scents that should have been comforting, yet he couldn't shake the unease that lingered from the previous day. The events with Karen, the unexpected intruder, and the arrival of the police replayed in his mind like a troubling movie. He knew that the peace he had always associated with the cabin was fragile now, and he needed to find a way to reclaim both the space and his sense of security. He began the day with small tasks, trying to focus on the tangible rather than the unsettling thoughts. The porch swing needed oiling, the steps were slippery from last night's dew, and the fireplace had cooled, leaving ash and a faint smell of smoke. Daniel moved carefully, attending to each chore with precision. Every action helped him feel more in control, even though the memory of Linda's presence and Karen's confrontation still lingered. While fixing the porch swing, Daniel noticed the path leading to his cabin. Footprints from the previous day remained in the soft dirt, evidence of both his own arrival and of the person who had been living inside. The sight reminded him of how vulnerable the cabin had been, and he resolved to take further steps to protect it. He began thinking about security cameras, new locks, and other measures that could prevent a similar situation from happening again. As he worked, he recalled the reactions of his neighbors during the incident. Some had been quietly supportive, giving him nods and small gestures of encouragement. Others had seemed more cautious, unsure of how to react in a community where HOA politics were strong and sometimes intimidating. Daniel realized that rebuilding trust with his neighbors, as well as asserting his own authority over the cabin, would be necessary for the long-term peace he wanted. After breakfast, Daniel decided to take a walk through the property surrounding his cabin. The forest had a serene, almost magical quality in the early morning. The sunlight streaming through the branches created patterns on the ground, and the sound of birdsong added a peaceful rhythm. Walking through the familiar trails, he felt both comforted and reflective. He thought about his grandfather and how he had built the cabin from the ground up, enduring long days of hard labor with determination and care. This thought strengthened Daniel's resolve. If his grandfather could create something lasting from nothing but wood, stone, and willpower, then he could certainly reclaim and protect it today. Returning to the cabin, Daniel checked every window and door, ensuring that each lock was secure. He made notes of weak points, places where someone could enter without permission. Afterward, he began researching affordable security systems that could be installed without too much difficulty. He wanted cameras, motion sensors, and an alarm system that could alert him if anyone approached the property unexpectedly. The idea of adding these precautions comforted him. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he was regaining control. Later that morning, there was a knock at the door. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should answer, then opened it to find one of his neighbors, Mrs. Thompson, standing there. She was an older woman, gentle and kind, with a warm smile. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "I heard what happened yesterday. That Karen woman, she can be difficult. You handled yourself well." Daniel thanked her, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. Mrs. Thompson had lived in the community for decades and was widely respected. Her presence reassured him that not everyone sided with Karen or approved of her actions. "I wanted to offer some advice," she continued. "Make sure you document everything from now on, photos, notes, anything unusual. And don't hesitate to involve the HOA board if necessary. There are people on it who understand boundaries." Daniel nodded. "Thank you. I plan to do just that. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again." Mrs. Thompson gave him an encouraging smile. "You have every right to feel that way. This is your home after all, and you're not alone." After she left, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that asserting his rights wasn't just about reacting to Karen or protecting the cabin physically. It was about being proactive, ensuring that both the property and the peace he associated with it remained intact. Over the next few days, Daniel worked tirelessly. He installed new locks on the doors, mounted a small security camera near the entrance, and added motion sensor lights around the perimeter. Each task made the cabin feel more like his own space again. He also contacted the HOA board directly, requesting clarification on their policies regarding vacant homes and unauthorized occupants. He wanted to make it clear that no one had the right to enter or occupy his cabin without his explicit permission. The board responded quickly, acknowledging Daniel's concerns and assuring him that Karen had acted outside her authority. They promised to review the incident and take appropriate action to prevent similar situations in the future. While this response didn't undo the disruption, it validated Daniel's position and gave him some peace of mind. One evening, after finishing the day's work, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the forest. He watched the shadows lengthen across the yard, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. For the first time since the confrontation, he allowed himself to relax. The cabin felt his own again, not because the walls or furniture had changed, but because he had taken steps to reclaim it. He also thought about the lessons he had learned. Trust was important, but so was vigilance. Kindness could exist alongside assertiveness, and while the community mattered, he could not allow someone else's interpretation of rules to overshadow his rights. The experience had been difficult, but it had also strengthened his sense of responsibility and connection to the cabin. As night fell, Daniel lit the fireplace and watched the flames dance. The warmth filled the room, and the familiar scent of burning wood brought back memories of family gatherings, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. He realized that while the incident with Karen and Linda had shaken him, it had also deepened his appreciation for the cabin and the history it represented. In the days that followed, Daniel continued to work on small projects around the cabin, repairing minor damage, cleaning, and organizing. He also reached out to neighbors, explaining the situation calmly and honestly. Most were sympathetic, offering support and advice. A few, who had been influenced by Karen's prior warnings, needed time to adjust, but Daniel handled them with patience. He focused on building trust and demonstrating that he was responsible and respectful, even when asserting his rights. Slowly, the tension began to fade. Daniel felt a renewed sense of ownership and security. He knew that Karen might continue to cause friction, but he was prepared to handle any future challenges. More importantly, he had restored his connection to the cabin, the place that had always been a source of peace and reflection. By the end of the week, Daniel could finally sit back, breathe, and enjoy the quiet he had been seeking. The cabin once again felt like home. The lessons of vigilance, patience, and self-advocacy had been learned, and Daniel knew he was stronger and wiser for it. The mountains, the trees, and the simple wooden walls of the cabin now held a renewed sense of safety and belonging, a reminder that while challenges might arise, the places we love can always be reclaimed through care, persistence, and respect for ourselves and our history. The following morning, Daniel woke to the soft light of the sun spilling across the cabin walls. The air was crisp, carrying the fresh scent of pine and earth. It felt like a new beginning, yet the memories of the recent confrontation still lingered in his mind. He had spent the past week reclaiming the cabin, securing it, and reconnecting with his neighbors. Still, the events had left a mark, and he knew that true peace would only come after reflection and careful action. Daniel started his day with a walk along the familiar forest trail behind his cabin. The trees stretched tall and proud, their leaves gently swaying in the morning breeze. As he walked, he thought about the lessons he had learned during the past week. One was that trust, while important, needed boundaries. Another was that kindness could coexist with firmness. He had realized that being a homeowner, especially in a community with strong HOA rules, meant understanding the balance between personal rights and neighborly cooperation. Reaching a small clearing, Daniel paused to take in the view. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the golden light of dawn. The lake nearby reflected the sky like a mirror, calm and undisturbed. It reminded him of why he loved this place so much. The tranquility, the natural beauty, and the sense of continuity that came from knowing his family had cared for this land for generations. He resolved that moving forward, he would protect that sense of home not just for himself, but for anyone who valued it as he did. Returning to the cabin, Daniel spent the morning documenting everything he had done in the past week. He took photos of the new locks, the security cameras, and the repairs he had made. He wrote notes about the incident with Karen and Linda, recording dates, times, and descriptions of what had happened. This record would be important if any disputes arose in the future, ensuring that he could prove his rights and actions clearly. By late morning, Daniel decided to speak directly with other members of the HOA board. He wanted to address the situation calmly and constructively, making sure that no one else would face similar issues. He sent an email outlining the incident, his concerns about overreach, and suggestions for clear guidelines about vacant properties. Within a few hours, he received responses from several board members expressing understanding and support. They agreed to review policies and ensure that homeowners' rights were clearly communicated to everyone in the community. Feeling encouraged, Daniel returned to the cabin and began a small project he had been postponing, repairing the old wooden deck. The sun was warm on his back as he sanded the wood, applied protective stain, and replaced any weakened boards. With each stroke and hammering sound, he felt more in control, more connected to the cabin. The work reminded him of his grandfather, who had built this very structure by hand. It was a humbling and grounding experience, reinforcing the idea that maintaining a home was not only about ownership, but also about care, effort, and respect for history. Around noon, Daniel took a break and walked to the small lake nearby. Sitting on a rock at the edge, he skipped stones across the water. The sound of the stones hitting the surface echoed quietly, mingling with the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. He reflected on the woman who had been living in his cabin. Linda had not intended harm. She had trusted Karen's word. This made Daniel think about human mistakes and misunderstandings. While he had every right to feel angry at Karen, he also recognized the importance of handling such situations without unnecessary conflict. Compassion paired with clear boundaries could prevent future problems. Returning to the cabin, Daniel found Mrs. Thompson waiting on his porch. She carried a small basket filled with apples and homemade bread. "I thought you might like a little company," she said with a warm smile. "And perhaps a snack after all your hard work." Daniel welcomed her inside. They sat in the living room, enjoying the food and the quiet of the cabin. Mrs. Thompson shared stories of the community, past events, and the people who had lived there for decades. Listening to her, Daniel realized that the cabin was not just his personal retreat. It was part of a larger network of neighbors and shared history. Understanding this network and maintaining respectful relationships would be key to ensuring that his home remained secure and peaceful. After she left, Daniel turned his attention to personal reflection. He thought about Karen's actions and the conflict she had caused. While he could never condone what she had done, he understood that reacting with anger alone would not solve anything. He decided to write a letter to the HOA board, documenting his experience and suggesting improvements for the community rules. His goal was not to punish Karen, but to prevent similar incidents for himself and others. Writing the letter gave him a sense of clarity and purpose, transforming frustration into constructive action. The afternoon passed quietly, and Daniel continued organizing his belongings. He rearranged books on the shelves, set out family photographs, and placed small touches that made the cabin feel truly like his own. The familiar spaces, now free from the presence of unauthorized visitors, regained their comforting character. Each action, no matter how small, contributed to his sense of homecoming and personal sovereignty. As evening approached, Daniel prepared a simple dinner and lit the fireplace. The warm glow of the fire filled the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He sat back, savoring the smell of cooking food and burning wood, and allowed himself a moment of gratitude. Despite the recent challenges, he had reclaimed his space, reinforced his boundaries, and learned valuable lessons about assertiveness, patience, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Later that night, Daniel stepped onto the porch and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the constellations stretched across the horizon in quiet brilliance. The mountains, the trees, and the lake all seemed to breathe with a calm rhythm, reminding him that life continued beyond the immediate conflicts and challenges. He realized that while people could create difficulties, the foundation of his peace came from his own actions and his connection to this place. In the days that followed, Daniel continued to work on the cabin and its surroundings. He planted small flowers near the porch, cleaned the windows, and added a few decorations to make the interior more welcoming. Each task strengthened his bond with the cabin and reinforced his sense of ownership. He also made an effort to reconnect with neighbors, building relationships based on mutual respect and understanding rather than fear or conflict. Karen did not return to the cabin after the incident, and over time, her influence in the community waned as others recognized the overreach of her actions. Daniel's calm, respectful approach had not only secured his own home, but also served as an example for the neighborhood about the importance of fairness, boundaries, and responsible behavior. Weeks later, Daniel sat on the porch again, reflecting on the entire experience. The cabin, which had once been disrupted and vulnerable, now felt stronger and more secure than ever. He had faced conflict, navigated a difficult situation, and emerged with not only his property intact, but also a deeper understanding of himself and the value of maintaining a balance between trust, vigilance, and community relations. He smiled to himself, thinking about the memories he had built here over the years and the ones he would continue to make. The cabin had survived challenges, and so had he. The mountains, the trees, and the quiet trails would always be there, offering solace and reflection. Daniel understood that while life could bring unexpected obstacles, the strength to overcome them lay within careful planning, patience, and a commitment to what truly mattered. As night fell, he sat back in his chair, the fire crackling warmly in the fireplace. The stars above twinkled like tiny lanterns in the vast sky. For the first time since the incident began, Daniel felt completely at peace. The cabin was his sanctuary once again, a place where he could rest, reflect, and embrace the simple beauty of life. It had been a journey filled with tension, confusion, and unexpected challenges, but it ended with clarity, empowerment, and a renewed sense of home. The story of that week, though difficult, became part of Daniel's own history, a reminder that the places we love are worth protecting, that standing up for oneself is sometimes necessary, and that resilience and calm can turn even the most troubling experiences into lessons for the future. Daniel knew that the cabin would continue to be a source of joy and comfort for him for years to come, a symbol of perseverance, careful thought, and the quiet strength that comes from truly taking ownership of one's life and home.